I've worked in a crematorium for 15 years, long enough to know the difference between the noises a building makes and the ones that shouldn't exist. Long enough to understand that, in this line of work, silence isn't peaceful. It's only the moment before something decides to speak. People joke that crematorium attendants must be fearless. They're wrong. We're just good at pretending. I used to believe fire was the final answer to everything. Fire ends decay. Fire ends questions. Fire ends suffering. But on the worst night of my career, fire did the opposite. Fire woke something up. It started at 11:42 p.m., late enough that the world outside Oak Ridge Cremation Center had already fallen asleep, but early enough for me to still believe the shift would be quiet. I'd poured myself stale coffee, flicked through the logbook, and told myself this would be like any other night. One body. No family. No ceremony. In and out. Then the stretcher came through the service elevator. A man in his late 50s, no identifying marks except a faint burn ring around each wrist, like someone had tried to tie him down with heated metal. The medical examiner wrote cardiac arrest. But when I placed my gloved hand on his chest to verify, his skin carried a warmth that didn't belong to the dead. Not days after death. Not hours. And definitely not when the morgue temp was set to 38 degrees. Still, I told myself what every crematorium worker has to tell themselves eventually: bodies do strange things. Don't read into it. I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I had listened to every instinct screaming at me to walk away. Because the moment I pushed that stretcher down the hallway toward the retort room, every fluorescent light above me flickered in perfect rhythm. On, off, as if someone was pacing overhead, stepping on each panel. I hadn't seen anything like that in this building. And trust me, I've seen lights glitch, screens freeze, doors jam, but this felt intentional. Like the power outage was waiting specifically for him to arrive. I tried to laugh it off, even whispered, "Come on, Oak Ridge, not tonight." But the lights didn't care. Inside the retort room, the steel furnace door loomed like a vault to somewhere no one should go willingly. I wheeled the stretcher forward, hit the switch that opens the loading tray, and that's when I heard it. A voice. Not loud. Not clear. Just one breathy whisper coming from behind me. Ethan. My name. Nobody else was in the building. Nobody else was on shift. And the security camera feed, mounted directly above my head, glitched into a static snowstorm the very second the voice spoke. I froze. Not because of fear, but because the whisper didn't sound angry. It sounded disappointed. Like someone I'd known once was calling out to me from a deep, dark place. I turned slowly, expecting, I don't know what. A coworker playing a prank. A radio left on. Anything reasonable. But the room was empty. Only me, the stretcher, and the dead man on it. I remember staring at the body bag, feeling the zipper like a line between two worlds, one I understood and one I never dared to believe in. The air temperature dropped suddenly, enough for my breath to fog. Oak Ridge's furnace room never gets cold. Never. That's when the whisper came again, clearer this time, closer. Don't do it again. Again. The word carved down my spine like ice. I didn't know it then, but that night the dead weren't asking for peace. They were asking for answers. And I was the only one left to give them. People always assume crematorium workers end up here because we're comfortable around death. Truth is, most of us come because we're tired of the living. Before Oak Ridge, I worked in a hospital ER in Atlanta. Night shift, constant chaos, the kind that grinds the soul into something brittle. I watched people fight for air, fight nurses, fight reality. Every night felt like a punch thrown by God or whoever was running the show. And after 7 years of listening to families scream at each other over a dying relative's bed, something in me broke. Not loudly. Not violently. Just quietly. Like a hinge loosening. I remember my last night there, a young man coded on the table. We really did, but his mother burst into the room just in time to see us call the time of death. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. Instead, she stared at me, eyes hollow, and whispered, "You didn't fight hard enough." I kept hearing that sentence for weeks. When Oak Ridge Cremation Center posted an opening for a night attendant, it felt like an answer, not to a prayer, but to an exhaustion I couldn't name. A place where the noise stopped. A place where I could breathe again. People think crematoriums are grim. They're wrong. At night they're quiet. Peaceful. Predictable. Machines hum the same every hour. Paperwork doesn't scream at you. The dead don't argue. There's a strange comfort in that consistency, like stepping into a room where time moves slower. And for a long time, Oak Ridge was exactly that for me. The retort room became my sanctuary. The rhythm of loading trays, the metallic slide of the door, the soft rush of the igniters. Those sounds steadied me more than any meditation app or late-night whiskey ever could. I learned the patterns, the temperatures, the little quirks in the furnaces that only someone who listens carefully can detect. Most nights felt like operating a giant, steel heartbeat. Steady. Reliable. And I took pride in my work. Most people don't know this, but cremation isn't just a technical process. There's a reverence to it. A responsibility. Families trust you with the last physical piece of someone they loved. You handle their grief even when they're not there to see it. Sometimes especially then. So while people assume it's a depressing job, it actually gave me something I didn't realize I'd lost. A sense of purpose. A reason to show up. A reason to stay calm in a world that never stops shaking. Sometimes I think the reason I stayed at Oak Ridge so long wasn't the quiet, it was the guilt. Long before crematoriums and night shifts, long before the ER burned me out, I once ignored a call from someone who needed me. My younger brother. He'd phoned late one evening, voice shaking, saying he felt like something inside him was breaking. I was too tired, too irritated, too wrapped up in my own world. I told him we'd talk tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. He died by morning, heart failure, sudden, unexplained. And for years I've lived with the echo of that missed chance. Maybe that's why cremation made sense to me. The dead don't ask for help. They don't call your phone at midnight. They don't need you. Until that night, when one of them finally did. But purpose only carries you so far when the rules shift. The first time something unusual happened at Oak Ridge wasn't the night the dead man whispered my name. It was 3 weeks earlier. A different body, different shift, but the same unnerving warmth in the skin. The same flicker in the lights. The same feeling that someone, something, was trying to take one last breath before the fire reached them. I told myself I imagined it. Everyone in this line of work sees things now and then. Muscle spasms, trapped air escaping the lungs, the occasional twitch of a tendon tightening. We're trained to dismiss it. That dismissal keeps you sane. But the truth is that night planted a seed. A small, cold one. Because when the lights flickered again 3 weeks later, when the hallway hummed like something electrical was crawling through the walls, when the dead man whispered, "Don't do it again," I felt everything inside me freeze. Not because of the whisper, but because part of me already knew what he meant. Oak Ridge wasn't peaceful anymore. It wasn't predictable. And whatever had woken up in that furnace room, it remembered me. The night everything unraveled didn't come crashing in with thunder or sirens. It slipped in quietly, like a draft under a locked door, cold enough to make your bones pay attention before your mind does. It started with the wind. Oak Ridge sits on the edge of an old industrial zone, surrounded by abandoned textile mills and empty parking lots that look like nobody's crossed them in decades. Winds funnel through those concrete corridors and howl through the vents, but that night, it didn't sound like wind. It sounded like murmuring. Oh, rhythmic. Almost conversational. I remember pausing in the loading corridor, one hand on the stretcher handle, trying to convince myself it was just the HVAC acting up again. But the way the sound rose and fell, like breath passing through clenched teeth, it made the hair on my arms stand up. Then my phone buzzed with a text from dispatch. Body incoming. No family. No belongings. Do your standard. Standard. Nothing about that shift turned out to be standard. The service elevator groaned louder than usual as it descended. When the doors slid open, I felt the temperature drop several degrees. The cold wasn't normal morgue cold, it was the kind of cold that hits your lungs and burns on the way in. The body lay zipped in a black bag, tag clipped to the handle. No listed cause of death. No next of kin. Just a time stamp and an address from the outskirts of the county, the kind of place people disappear from without anyone asking questions. I wheeled the stretcher into the hallway, and that's when the lights began their pattern. Not flickering. Not dimming. Blinking. In perfect, methodical intervals. Like someone walking directly above me, their steps syncing with each fluorescent panel. I should have called maintenance. I should have documented it. But I didn't. Because the last time this happened, 3 weeks earlier, the light stopped the moment the body entered the retort room. I'd convinced myself it was coincidence. Overload. Old wiring. But seeing it happen again, with a body just as mysterious as the last, it felt like déjà vu tightening around my throat. I tried breathing it away, focusing on the sound of the stretcher wheels. They usually echo sharply against the concrete floors, but that night, the wheels sounded muffled, like the hallway had swallowed the acoustics whole. Halfway to the furnace room, the stretcher jerked to the side. Not because I pulled it. Not because the floor was uneven. It moved like something underneath had shifted its weight. I stopped. Stared at the bag. Waited for it to settle. Bodies can twitch post-mortem. Nerves fire. Muscles jump. Small movements happen. But this wasn't small. It felt intentional. I muttered under my breath, "Not tonight, please not tonight." The wheels straightened again almost obediently and I continued. As I approached the retort room, the security screens mounted above the doorway glitched, lines of static slicing through the feed. In the bottom left monitor, the one pointed at the hallway behind me, I saw something that pulled the air straight out of my lungs. A shadow. Tall. Thin. Longer than the human body should be. Standing exactly where I'd just walked. I turned around instantly, but the hallway was empty. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Nothing existed except the faint hum of failing lights. For a moment, I considered turning back, logging the body for morning staff, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But that's not how this job works. You finish the shift. You follow procedure. You do what's required. So I pushed forward, hand trembling on the metal door handle as I opened the retort room. And that's when I noticed it. A faint smell of burnt metal, sharp, acrid, fresh, floating in the air. The smell you get when something has already started burning, before the fire even begins. The retort room greeted me with a hum I didn't recognize, low, vibrating, almost like a growl buried under the machinery. The overhead vents rattled in short, uneven bursts, as if something inside them was struggling for air. I pushed the stretcher through the doorway, but it stopped an inch short of the center line, like the wheels had suddenly locked. When I leaned down to check, nothing was blocking them. Nothing jammed. Nothing bent. The stretcher simply refused to move. I exhaled long and slow, braced my hands on the handle and forced it forward. Metal squealed across the floor, not the stretcher wheels but the sound of something dragging beneath it. And for a split second I saw the body bag shift. Not rise. Not tremble. Just shift. Like someone inside had adjusted their spine. My stomach tightened. I stepped around the stretcher, gripped the zipper, and hesitated. We always verify. It's part of the job. But that night, opening that bag felt like peeling back the lid of something sealed for a reason. Before I zipped the bag halfway closed, I glanced at the thin manila folder resting on the stretcher, something the transport team must have left with the body. It shouldn't have been there. Cremation files are typically clean, standardized, stripped of anything unnecessary. But this one wasn't clean. Inside were 3 hospital intake sheets from different facilities across the county. All 3 listed him as found outdoors, severely dehydrated, muttering the same phrase each time, "They tried to burn me alive." Each discharge form noted no external burns found. At the bottom of the last page, a handwritten note, partially erased, indentation still visible, read, "Patient claims he can feel heat under his skin. Insists he is still burning from the inside." A cold shiver cut through me. Whatever had happened to this man didn't start in my furnace. I pulled the zipper down. The man's face appeared, ashen, stiff, eyes closed, mouth sewn shut with the standard mortuary thread. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Until I noticed the thread itself. It wasn't intact. The bottom stitch had frayed, snapped in a way that didn't look accidental. It looked chewed. Torn from the inside. I swallowed hard and checked his arms to confirm tagging. His wrists, the same ones marked by burn rings, seemed darker now, as if the char had deepened during transport. The skin around the burns looked cracked, like it had been exposed to heat long after his heart stopped. But what made me pull my hand back wasn't the burns. It was the warmth. His skin was warmer now than when he arrived. Warmer than any corpse should be after hours in cold storage. Warmer than the air in the room. A pulse of dread washed down my spine. Still, procedure was procedure. I steadied myself, closed the bag halfway, and moved to the console to extend the loading tray. The hydraulic arms whined, pushing the steel platform outward. The sound echoed through the room like a deep mechanical inhale. As the tray extended, one of the overhead lights flickered and popped, sending a shower of sparks onto the floor. The sparks fizzled instantly, leaving behind a faint scorch that shouldn't have been possible on industrial tile. The smell of burnt metal intensified. Fresh, sharp. Impossible to ignore. I rolled the stretcher up to the open tray and began lifting the body. Dead weight is predictable, but this man felt wrong. Heavy where he should be light. Rigid in places where rigor mortis should have already released. The sort of heaviness that feels intentional, like every muscle was resisting my grip. When I finally slid him onto the steel tray, the entire furnace shuddered. Not a mechanical tremor. Not a vibration. A shudder, like something inside the chamber reacted to his presence. I stared at the open furnace mouth, the dark, hollow interior illuminated by a dim readiness glow. It felt like staring into an animal's throat. My fingers hovered over the switch to retract the tray, But the room went dead silent. The vents stopped rattling. The hum ceased. Even the hallway beyond the door fell still. And in that unnatural quiet, I heard something that froze me from the inside out. A breath, soft, slow, coming from the body lying on the tray. I leaned closer, telling myself it was residual air escaping the lungs, a normal occurrence, a biological leftover. Science, not fear. But the breath didn't fade like trapped air should. It deepened, strengthened. Then, on the final exhale, I heard it, barely audible but unmistakable. Ethan. My name. Again. And this time it didn't come from behind me. It came from the body in the furnace. I hit the switch with a slap, and the tray jerked inward, sliding the man into the chamber. The furnace door slammed shut with a thud so violent it shook the entire room. My heart hammered, my hands trembled, and for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't sure if the fire would destroy what was inside, or set it free. The moment the furnace door clamped shut, I slapped the ignition switch with the same instinct you use when swatting something venomous off your skin. The burners roared to life, filling the chamber with a rising, suffocating heat. I stared at the temperature gauge, willing the numbers upward, praying that whatever I heard, whatever whispered my name, would be smothered beneath flame and steel. For a few seconds, everything behaved. The room hummed. The burners crackled. The gauge climbed steadily, 400 degrees, 600 degrees, 900 degrees. Then came the first knock. Soft. A single tap. Like a fingertip brushing against a window. I froze. My hand still hovered over the console, inches from the kill switch. Cremation chambers make noise, metal expands, tiles settle, burners kick. But this sound wasn't mechanical. It had timing. Intention. Another knock followed, this one firmer. A dull thud that echoed through the steel walls. My pulse throbbed in my throat. Bodies don't move in that stage of the process. They tighten, they crackle, sometimes they release trapped gases. But they do not pound on industrial-grade steel. The third knock came faster. Harder. Like a fist. The furnace shuddered. I stumbled back, hitting the rolling chair behind me. It slid out from under me and crashed into a cabinet, the sound slicing through the air like a warning shot. Stop, I whispered to no one. Or maybe to myself. The knocking didn't stop. It grew louder. More frantic. 3 rapid blows. Thud. 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 Followed by a dragging scrape that traveled across the interior wall of the chamber, long and gritty, like fingernails carving into metal. My breath hitched. The temperature gauge flickered. It should have been climbing, but instead it stuttered, 933 degrees, 910 degrees, 925 degrees, as if something inside was resisting the heat, pulling the temperature down with every strike. A voice crawled up the back of my mind, training, logic, protocol, reminding me I should check the furnace window. Confirm chamber activity. Document anomalies. But my legs refused to move. My body knew something my mind didn't want to accept. Still, I forced myself forward, inch by inch, until I stood before the reinforced glass. I wiped the surface with my sleeve, clearing a patch fogged by the sudden heat surge. Inside, the flames rippled across the chamber floor, bright and violent, yet the body wasn't lying flat anymore. It was tilted, propped on an elbow, as if rising. My stomach twisted so violently I had to brace myself against the console. The air felt thicker, tighter, like the room itself had begun shrinking around me. Then the body moved again. Slow. Deliberate. The arm that had been wedged awkwardly against the tray now lifted, against the direction of the flames, against the weight of gravity, against every rule of death. The hand pressed itself against the inside of the viewing window. A handprint bloomed on the glass, not soot, not condensation, but a smear of black ash, each finger defined, each ridge hauntingly clear. It stood out against the glowing interior like a signature. The chamber temperature plunged another 20 degrees. And then, through the roar of the burners, through the pounding inside the door, I heard it. A voice. Raspy. Burning. Too close to be imagined. Let me out. My knees nearly buckled. I staggered back from the window, slamming into the wall. The emergency alarm switch stared at me, a bright red lifeline I couldn't bring myself to touch. Because calling emergency services meant answering questions I had no answers for. The furnace door jolted outward, a concussive thump that rattled the hinges. A crack formed along the top seam of the steel, thin but unmistakable. Something inside wanted out. Something inside was strong enough to try. The burners roared louder, the flames surged higher, and yet the knocking continued, angry now, desperate, shaking the very foundation of the room. And for the first time since taking this job, I realized something terrifying. The fire wasn't consuming him. The fire was feeding him. The pounding inside the furnace didn't stop. It only shifted tempo. What began as frantic fists slowly evolved into something worse. A steady, deliberate rhythm. A rhythm that felt practiced. Familiar. Almost human. But, pause. Then another 3 strikes. It was the deliberate pause that gutted me. Panic is messy, uncalculated. This wasn't. My breath hitched as I stepped back toward the viewing window, drawn by fear and disbelief in equal measure. Heat radiated from the door, warming my face, but the window itself remained strangely cool. Wrong, impossibly wrong. That glass should have been hot enough to blister skin. I braced my hand against it anyway. Inside the chamber, I expected chaos. Flames whipping around violently, the body thrashing, something demonic tearing at steel. But what I saw instead froze every nerve in my body. The flames bent around him. They didn't consume him. They moved aside, curling away like fabric caught in a draft. And in the center of that divide, the man sat up. Slowly. Mechanically. Bone by bone. His spine straightened first, vertebrae cracking like knuckles popping in sequence. Then his shoulders rolled forward, shrugging off the restraint of death. His head lifted last, drooping backward before swinging upright with a sickening snap that echoed through the chamber. His eyes opened. They weren't fiery or glowing or supernatural. They were worse, milky, unfocused, the eyes of someone who should never see again. Yet they locked directly onto mine. I stumbled backward, knocking over a metal stool. It clattered across the tiles, the sound jagged and harsh in the suffocating room. But he didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just stared. And then he raised his hand again. The ash print he'd left moments earlier began to darken, the edges thickening as if the heat from inside was feeding it. A second hand joined the first, spreading soot across the glass in long, dragging streaks. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to touch me. Ethan. The voice slithered through the chamber's vents, not booming or monstrous, soft, broken, full of something disturbingly close to grief. I whipped around, expecting to see someone behind me. The voice felt too close, too intimate, like it brushed past my ear on its way out of the furnace. But I was alone. The room seemed to tilt under my feet, my balance faltering with every breath. 15 years in this job and nothing, had ever made me question what was alive and what wasn't. Until that moment. Against every instinct screaming inside me, I looked back into the window. He was rising to his knees. The fire rolled harmlessly along his skin, tracing the outline of his arms, his jawline, the curved seam of the mortuary stitches that had once sealed his mouth. The stitches snapped one by one, falling into the flames like burning threads. His mouth opened, not wide, not gaping, just barely. Just enough to speak. Why, again. That word. The one he whispered earlier, now formed by a jaw that should not articulate, a throat scorched beyond sound. My own reflection appeared faintly on the glass, eyes wide, shaking hands pressed against the window, and for a moment, it looked like his burned cheek was pressed against my reflection, as if he was trying to merge with it. The chamber temperature, instead of rising, plummeted again, dropping 40 degrees in seconds. Frost bloomed at the edges of the reinforced glass, spiderwebbing outward in delicate crystalline veins. Hot flames shouldn't freeze anything. Not ever. But somehow the impossible was becoming routine. Suddenly his body lunged forward. Not fully, just enough for his face to collide with the glass. A scream tore from my throat as the furnace door shuddered violently, bolts straining, hinges groaning under pressure. His forehead pressed harder, grinding ash into the window. His lips moved, slow, deliberate. Let me. A deafening crack shot across the door frame. One hinge buckled. Out. That was it. The moment fear finally overruled duty. The moment instinct won. I turned and ran. Not because I didn't want answers, but because I understood, with horrifying clarity, that the fire wasn't restraining him. It was releasing him. I tore out of the retort room, lungs burning as hard as the flames I had just fled from. The hallway outside, normally buzzing with the low hum of industrial equipment, was eerily still. Every fluorescent tube above me glowed in a weak, strained pulse, flickering like the building itself was struggling to stay alive. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud. Too loud. Like something was repeating them half a beat behind me. I spun around. Empty hallway. No moving shadows. No figure trailing me. But the air was wrong. It felt thicker, dense enough that each breath tasted metallic, like warm pennies pressed to my tongue. I forced myself forward, trying to reach the security office. If I could lock myself in, call someone, anyone, maybe the night could still end with something logical. Something explainable. But logic didn't survive long in Oak Ridge that night. Halfway down the corridor, the intercom system crackled to life. Static hissed through the vents, crawling down the walls like invisible insects. I slowed, staring at the speaker above the supply room door. The static shifted. Formed shape. A whisper slipped through, quiet but unmistakably human. Ethan. I froze so violently my knees nearly buckled. The intercom crackled again. Don't run. My throat dried instantly. My name echoed down the hallway, but it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded wounded. Like someone was pleading with me to stay. Someone who remembered me. But no one alive should have been calling my name. No one dead should have been able to. The voice grew clearer, turning into a ragged breath, wet, strained, dragging across the speakers like it was being torn from a ruptured lung. You left me. Left him. I stumbled backward, shaking my head. No, I didn't leave anyone. But my voice cracked, betraying the truth I hadn't let myself think about in weeks. 3 weeks ago. The first warm body. The first strange flicker in the lights. The first knock inside the furnace. Back then, I told myself it was a reflex, a final nerve spasm, nothing more. Bodies do that sometimes. They twitch. They release air. They make sounds that can fool the untrained ear. But now, hearing him speak, hearing recognition in that ruined voice, I felt a cold realization settle in my chest like a stone dropped into deep water. Maybe it wasn't a twitch. Maybe it wasn't a reflex. Maybe he was alive. Why, again? The words slithered through the intercom, stretched thin with agony. My back hit the wall. I didn't even realize I'd been retreating. The lights above me flickered in a ripple, one dimming behind me, then the next. Like someone was walking slowly toward me, each step snuffing out the light overhead. I pressed my hands against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Please, the voice cracked as if the speaker's throat was filling with smoke. Don't leave me this time. My vision blurred. Whether from fear or guilt, I couldn't tell. The hallway darkened one bulb at a time, the darkness crawling toward me with a steady, predatory rhythm. I knew I had to move. I knew I had to break the paralysis gripping my body before whatever was walking the darkness reached me. But then the lights ahead of me, all the way to the far end, shut off at once. Pitch black. Something exhaled in the darkness. A slow, deliberate, burning exhale. Ethan. Not from the speakers. From the hallway itself. From the dark. My heartbeat slammed into my ribs as a tall silhouette rippled into view, framed only by the faint emergency light above the exit door. Shoulders too narrow. Spine too long. Head tilted in a way no living man would choose. I backed away, trembling. What do you want? I whispered. The figure lifted its hand. Ash trailed from its fingertips, drifting through the air like burnt snow. Then it answered, soft, broken, and devastatingly human. You didn't listen. And in that single moment, reality shattered. Because I knew exactly what he meant. The silhouette in the darkness didn't move at first. It simply stood there, tall, thin, wrong, its edges rippling like heat haze even though the hallway was freezing. Ash drifted from its fingers and dissolved before touching the ground, leaving the air thick with the metallic scent of burnt wire. I couldn't breathe. Not because I didn't want to, but because something inside me finally understood. He wasn't haunting the furnace. He wasn't trapped in the fire. He was following me. Please, I whispered, though I wasn't sure whom I was pleading with, him, myself, or whatever gods might be listening. Tell me what you want. The figure tilted its head slowly, like the motion required relearning. A soft crackling sound followed, reminiscent of wood bending under heat. When it spoke, the voice didn't echo through the intercom anymore. It vibrated directly through the hallway into my bones. You heard me, 3 weeks ago? My stomach lurched. 3 weeks ago, the first warm corpse, the one I'd dismissed. The one whose hand twitched. The one I swore I heard something from as the flames consumed him. I'd walked away that night, telling myself it was a trick of grief, of exhaustion, of imagination. But it wasn't imagination. It was him. The figure took one step forward, and the overhead lights behind it fizzled out in a synchronized collapse, plunging half the hallway into deeper darkness. I stumbled backward, hands scraping against the wall as I tried to find something, anything, to shield myself. My fingers brushed against a mop bucket, a supply cart, a cold metal railing. Useless objects against something that wasn't bound by flesh. Why did you leave me? The voice trembled, no longer angry, broken. Guilt stung like acid. I didn't know, I said, voice cracking. I swear, I didn't know you were alive. A hiss rippled through the hallway. Not aggressive, just pained. The figure's shoulders sagged. The ash that drifted from its fingertips thickened, swirling in the air like soot caught in a storm. Heard me? It took another step, the movement unnatural, as if every joint had been reset incorrectly. And walked away. A memory crashed into me, the knock in the furnace 3 weeks earlier. The moment I paused. The second when doubt brushed against my mind, but I still turned the burners on. The lights flickered violently, sparks raining from a damaged fixture. The figure stepped fully into the emergency glow now, and I saw him clearly. Or what was left of him. Skin charred in ashen patches. Furnace scars etched into limbs. Smoke embedded in the hollow of his eyes. But the worst part wasn't the damage. It was the expression. Broken. Confused. Begging. You let me burn, he whispered. My knees weakened. He wasn't here to kill me. Not yet. He wanted understanding. Recognition. Acknowledgement of the betrayal he'd felt in his final moments. I didn't know you were alive, I repeated, tears burning behind my eyes. If I had known. The figure's head jerked, glitching upward at an unnatural angle. You heard? He rasped. Ethan, you heard. The guilt tightened around my chest like wire. Because he was right. Somewhere deep down I had heard something. And I chose the easy explanation. You're here for revenge. The words escaped me before I could stop them. No, the entity stepped closer, close enough for the emergency light to reveal the faint outline of a gurney tag still attached to his wrist. I'm here, because I didn't die until you closed the door. A cold drop of dread slid down my spine. He hadn't come to punish me. He'd come to finish dying. But now he was caught between worlds anchored by my mistake. The entity lifted his hand, ash swirling around it, reaching toward me the way a drowning man reaches for the surface. Help me, he whispered. But when his fingers brushed the edge of the light, the fire inside him flared again, twisting into something feral. His scream tore through the hallway. Not angry. Not vengeful. Agonized. And I realized, whatever he was now, I wasn't the one he needed to fear. He wasn't in control anymore. The fire was. The entity's scream ripped through the hallway, shaking the vents and rattling the glass in their frames. It wasn't directed at me, it was directed at the flames still burning inside him, the same flames that refused to let him fully die. He staggered backward, spasming, his charred shoulders jerking at angles no living bones could manage. Lines of heat rippled across his skin, glowing like molten cracks in stone. He was being pulled, not by gravity, not by will, but by the fire that had claimed him. And in the seconds he writhed, I ran. I spun toward the exit doors at the far end of the hallway, shoes pounding across the tile, breath slicing out of me in sharp bursts. The emergency lights flickered above me in a frantic strobe, on, off, casting the world into jagged snapshots. Snapshot, the supply cart overturning as I slammed past. Snapshot, the dark smear of ash spreading along the wall. Snapshot, the entity lurching upright again. I pushed harder. Behind me, the scream deepened into something worse, a guttural roar that vibrated through the walls and made the air feel liquid in my lungs. The temperature surged, heat rolling after me in waves like a furnace door had blown open. The exit was 15 feet away. 10. 8. Then the doors slammed shut. The metal echoed like a judge's gavel, sealing the hallway with finality. The magnetic locks clicked into place, a sound I'd only heard during fire drills and scheduled inspections. I grabbed the handle and yanked. Nothing. The door didn't even rattle. No, come on. I shouted, slamming my shoulder into it. Behind me the footsteps began. Slow. Dragging. Growing heavier with each step. I spun, heart ricocheting in my chest. The entity was coming down the hallway, not quickly, not violently, but with the inevitability of a tide rolling in. Flames curled off him in thin ribbons, licking the ceiling. Wherever they touched, the lights blew out. He wasn't walking toward me. He was being pulled toward me. Ethan? His voice sounded hollow, like it was echoing up from a well. I stumbled backward until my spine hit the cold steel of the exit door. My fingers scrambled at the keypad beside it, punching in the override code I'd memorized on my first week, one I'd never thought I'd need. 2-1-4-7-6. The keypad blinked red. Invalid. I tried again. Hands slick with sweat. 2-1-4-7-6. Red. The air thickened. The floor trembled. The entity's flames flared brighter. Please, don't leave me again. His voice cracked so deeply it sounded like glass breaking underwater. I tried the code again, 2 to 1, but the keypad sparked violently, popping in my face, lights dying as smoke curled from its seams. The crematorium didn't want me leaving. Or maybe, it didn't want him leaving. The entity raised his hand, palm outstretched. Ash spiraled around it, forming a shape I recognized instantly, a handprint. The same one smeared on the furnace window. It glowed brighter. Brighter. Too bright to look at. I ducked as a blast of heat surged past me, slamming into the door and buckling the metal outward. The impact knocked me sideways, crashing me onto the floor. Pain shot up my ribs as I scrambled onto my hands and knees. The door was no longer locked. It hung crooked on one hinge, buckled outward from the inside as though something had tried to shove me out. A warning. Or mercy. The entity let out a ragged howl behind me, and that was enough. I grabbed the twisted edge of the door, squeezed through the jagged gap, and stumbled into the loading bay. The night air hit me like a slap, cold, real, alive. The contrast almost made me drop to my knees in relief. But then I heard it. A whisper carried through the open crack of the broken door. Don't leave. I didn't look back. I sprinted across the loading lot, gravel scattering under my boots, lungs tearing for air. My car was parked under a flickering floodlight, its beam struggling against the darkness, swallowing Oak Ridge behind me. As I reached for the handle, I dared one single glance over my shoulder. In the raw blackness of the doorway stood the silhouette, taller now, distorted, flames weaving through its shape like a skeleton made of fire. Watching. Waiting. And worst of all, following. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and jammed the keys into the ignition with shaking hands. The engine coughed twice before roaring to life. Every instinct screamed at me to floor it, to get as far from Oak Ridge as possible, to pretend none of this was happening. But fear has a way of freezing you before it frees you. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles blanched white, staring through the windshield at the flickering floodlight. The building loomed behind me like a wounded animal, hissing smoke from vents, emergency lights still stuttering, shadows twisting in ways shadows shouldn't. I wanted to believe I had outrun it. But deep down I already knew better. When I finally pulled out of the lot, gravel crunching under my tires, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. Some part of me was certain I'd see him standing in the doorway, or worse, standing right behind me. I drove home faster than I should have. Streetlights blurred into streaks of amber. My breath fogged the inside of the car even though the heater was off. Every turn felt too sharp, every shadow too deep. By the time I reached my driveway, dawn was bleeding into the horizon, a dull, lifeless gray. I killed the engine, sat there for a long time, and finally convinced myself to go inside. The house greeted me with silence. Normal silence. The kind I used to crave. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, turned on every light. It didn't help. The air felt different, heavier, like something invisible had slipped inside with me. As I stepped deeper into the living room, something crunched under my boot. At first I thought it was leftover debris from the move I still hadn't finished. But when I lifted my foot, my stomach lurched. A small pile of black ash sat on the floor, fine, powdery, unmistakably the same color and texture I'd swept from the furnace room countless times. Except this ash wasn't cold. When I touched it, a faint warmth pulsed through it, like an ember refusing to die. A thin trail of the same ash led toward the hallway, disappearing right outside the bathroom door. My breath hitched as I followed it. Each step closer, the air grew warmer, unnaturally so, like standing too close to an open cremation chamber. Something had been in my house before I ever stepped inside. I went straight to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, gripped the edge of the sink until my vision steadied. My reflection looked unfamiliar, pale, strained, eyes hollowed out from fear and guilt. Then the mirror fogged. Slowly. Perfectly evenly. Like someone was standing directly behind me, breathing. I spun around, nothing there. Just the crack under the door, faint light leaking through it. I told myself I was overtired, traumatized, imagining things. Until I looked back at the mirror. A handprint. Pressed into the fog. Inside the glass, not on the surface. The same shape. The same smudged fingers. The same deep, ash-like streaks trailing down. My breath hitched. My knees weakened. A whisper slid through the room, low and tremoring. Ethan. I backed into the wall, knocking over the laundry basket, heart in my throat. The whisper repeated, closer this time, closer than any living voice could be without touching skin. You left me. My hands trembled uncontrollably. I'm sorry, I whispered. God, I'm so sorry. The house groaned. The light above the mirror flickered. The air temperature dropped so sharply frost bloomed across the edges of the glass. And then, the most horrifying thing, my reflection moved before I did. Its head turned slightly. Its shoulders shifted. A second silhouette, tall, thin, scorched, formed behind mine. Its face hovered just above my reflection's shoulder. It leaned forward. The mirror cracked. I screamed and stumbled out of the bathroom, slamming the door shut. My back pressed into the hallway wall, chest heaving. The doorframe vibrated with a dull, rhythmic tapping from the other side. But, just like in the furnace. I fled into the living room, grabbing my keys, my jacket, anything I could reach. But as I reached the front door, I froze. The glass pane beside it, the one I'd cleaned just 2 days earlier, was smeared with a fresh, black ash handprint. On the inside, a chill swept through me so deep it felt stitched into my bones. I didn't stay. I couldn't. I bolted out the back door, ran until my muscles gave out, until the sunrise burned my eyes, until I found myself trembling on a park bench miles from home. People walking their dogs glanced at me with concern, but none of them saw the soot marks on my clothes, the way my breath fogged unnaturally, or the faint scent of burnt metal clinging to me. None of them heard the whisper that followed me all the way there. Not done. I don't know where to go. I don't know how to fight something that already burned. All I know is this. When you cremate a man who isn't dead, you don't free him. You anchor him. And now he's not just tied to the furnace. He's tied to me. And the fire inside him is learning how to follow.